I got the Steam Deck a week ago, and is it worth the money for a busy dad? Yes, but let's find out why. After nearly a year of waiting for this thing to actually get into my hands, I finally got my hands on it and have been using it over the past week. Now, I went with the middle version, so this one's only a 256 gig model. There is a 64 and a 512, but I've had it for about a week now, so I'm going to go over and give you my initial impressions of both the good and the bad, and what you can expect if you do decide to pre-order this thing and then wait until October. Now let's dive right into the good things about the Steam Deck, and the first one right off the bat is that my Steam library is potentially compatible with the Steam Deck. Now this is both a good and a bad thing, of which I'll actually get to in just a moment on the bad. But the good is a majority of my Steam library is compatible with the Steam Deck. The second cool thing about the Steam Deck is that you can actually change the graphical settings just like you would be on PC. So if you want a game to last a little bit longer on that battery, you can go ahead and pare down all of the graphical settings or crank them up as high as humanly possible that the thing can handle, and then play whichever version you actually want to. It's not like on a console with Xbox where you get just performance or quality. You actually get a choice here. Now, the third really cool thing about this is that the compatibility mode on this Steam Deck is amazing, and they're constantly adding games to that compatibility list. Now, there's various versions that you're looking, well, I shouldn't say versions, but there's various compatibility models that they're going off of. So, for example, you have one that is native, and that means it's just running native on the Steam Deck. You have others that are verified, meaning that they're verified compatible with the Steam Deck. It'll run just fine. You shouldn't or wouldn't potentially have any real issues with it. And then you have the other ones where it's pending approval, or it's just not compatible at all, or it hasn't been tested. Now that's where things get into that gray area, which I'll get into in a moment. Now this may sound really lazy, and I don't care because I've been enjoying it, but the ability to play the Steam Deck in bed. Now, granted, I do have a Switch, and sometimes I play, like Breath of the Wild or something like that, but for the most part, I don't typically play my Switch in bed because there's not a lot of games right now that I even want to really play on the Switch. So with Steam Deck, I'm sitting there and I'm playing Elden Ring in bed at really high settings, and I'm just really enjoying it. And it's one of those where I didn't know how much I would enjoy it until I actually was able to do it. Now, the fifth thing I really like about the Steam Deck is that I'm going to be going on a trip here in the coming weeks, and the ability to go ahead and take my Steam Deck with me and all of my Steam library and to be able to play those games mobile is just really awesome. That I don't have to either carry around a Series S, I don't have to carry on a laptop. I just have this handheld that can play a majority of my Steam games. That will be awesome. Now, the sixth thing that I really like about the Steam Deck is that you can expand the memory either via SD card or opening it up and doing the SSD. Now, I wouldn't recommend opening it up unless you're really suave with technology and you're able to go that route. Otherwise, the SD card is going to be fine. Now, where that really will come into an issue is if you get an SD card that is too slow. Now, I tested this where I had a really slow SD card. It was one of those green ones. Green meaning that it was just lower capacity and lower speeds. And then I had another one that was more extreme, so it was well over a gigabit in transfer speeds. And going through and testing that, you can definitely feel the loading times being different on there. You can also see graphical hitches if it's loaded directly onto that SD card. So there's things that you're going to notice depending on what quality of SD card you get. This is just something to keep in mind when you're going through and picking out which Steam Deck version you want to go with. That's ultimately why I went with the 256 gig model, because it is using an NVMe M.2 drive in it, so it will have faster speeds than the 64 gig version. Now, coming up to the seventh thing that I really did enjoy about the Steam Deck is that, going back to a previous one, is that because of travel, this thing does come with a hard shell case, and that is something I have really enjoyed. I didn't think I'd really mind all that much because most other companies will actually have you buy it separately. But with Valve, they went ahead and included it as price of the Steam Deck. So that I do appreciate. And the case is a good quality. It has decent zippers. It's not going to sit there and, rattle around and smack the Steam Deck all over the place. It will protect the Steam Deck, and that is something I really do appreciate. Last but not least, I've only had the Steam Deck for about a week now. And within that week, and I haven't personally tested this, but I have seen where other people have been able to sideload Windows onto it. I've seen where you've been able to install emulators and ROMs. You can even go through and download mods for your Steam games. It's one of those type of things where the technology itself isn't locked down so hard where it's like your phone or your console. It does have a lot of opportunity to be modded. But again, that's not something I've personally tested, but it is something I've seen other people start to dive into. Now that brings me to the bad, and there's not a ton of bad here, but the biggest bad is that not all of my Steam library is actually compatible with the Steam Deck, at least not yet. And that's something I know Valve is currently working on, so I'm really excited to see how they continue to upgrade that. You're looking at sometimes there's, you'll see 1,000 games all of a sudden start to be, certified for the Steam Deck. So they're definitely working on that and making sure that it is getting as many games compatible as humanly possible. But until that is the case, that is going to be a knock on it, to where it is going to be in the bad section until they can get more of that library actually compatible with the Steam Deck. Now, the second bad thing, and you knew this had to be coming, is battery life. Now, when it comes to the battery life, it really depends on what kind of game you're playing. So, for example, if you're playing a AAA game like Elden Ring, I only got about 2 hours of gameplay out of that before it died. And that was with the settings, as good as they could possibly get for the Steam Deck. Now, if you're playing The Witcher 3, for example, I was able to get a little bit more time out of it, around 3 hours. And then if you're looking at some of the older games that aren't graphically intensive, then you may be looking at more to the 4 to 6 hour range. Again, your mileage will vary depending on what kind of game you're playing. By and large, the battery life is what it is. I didn't expect, great things, but I didn't expect bad, horrific things either. It's kind of sitting there in the middle, and it'll at least get the job done. Now, the third thing that I would consider a negative knock on it is that this thing can get loud. Now, because you have such powerful hardware sitting in this little compact design, the fan really does have to work to dissipate that heat, and so the fan noise can get pretty loud. Now, for me personally, I ended up just using some wired headphones for the most part, so it wasn't a huge thing for me. I just didn't notice unless I actually took the headphones off and was kind of shocked by how freaking loud this damn thing was. But overall, it will end up being loud. It may end up suppressing some of the sound depending on what you're doing, so that's something to also take into account. And like I mentioned, the heat is definitely noticeable depending on what kind of games you're playing. Now, the next two things are kind of nitpicks. They're not horrible. They're not even bad, I would say. They're just kind of why kind of items. So the first one is that SteamOS is still using a web app. So none of the functionality currently in it, for the most part, is native to the Steam Deck, which means every time you're clicking into something or you're selecting something, it's going and basically pulling in Steam's website to populate that page. And so it can take a while to populate some of those different pages. So it's not a native browsing experience. I would have liked to see that by launch, but I'm sure it's something that they're currently working on. But that's just a little bit of a nitpick. And then the second thing is the SD card. It doesn't have a cover, so you can go ahead and push the little SD card in there. It pops in just like it normally would with most things, and then if you pop the SD card out, there's just no cover, so potentially there could be a lot of dust that ends up accumulating in there. So that's just something it's just a nitpick, nothing huge, but something that you want to be aware of. And that brings us full circle. Should a busy dad actually pick up the Steam Deck? And for me personally, I love this little piece of technology. Now, granted, I've only had it a week, so take that with a huge grain of salt, but I have really enjoyed my time with it. At this point, if it is something that you're considering, I would at least put the $5 down to put your name in line for the pre-order, which allegedly will happen in October as of the filming of this video, but that at least gets you in line. So if it is something that you want to do and you want to spend that money on the Steam Deck come October, at least you're already there. If not, then that's also something you can take into account and buy it when it's more readily available. And when they've moved beyond those first generation hardware options, because there's probably going to be bugs that I haven't ran into yet. There's probably going to be issues with any first generation technology. You're going to run into that. So if you don't want to be an early adopter and you want to wait, that's definitely an option as well. And that's my experience with the Steam Deck after a week. Like I mentioned, take it with a huge grain of salt. But if you're still unsure of what kind of console you want to go with, make sure to check out my playlist on what kind of Xbox might be the best fit for you, and I'll see you over there.